Gimmicks have forever been part and parcel of pretty much every phone launch, but sometimes the expectations that build up from these fail to be met with the reality of what they actually are. Hey guys, Ash here, and today on C4E Tech we're gonna take a look at 10 overhyped phone gimmicks that failed. Let's start with number 10, 3D. 3D technology has been in development for over 100 years. Yep, you heard that right. The first commercial 3D movie was released a little over 100 years ago. The Power of Love all the way back in 1922. And it took 80 more years to get 3D onto a phone. Fun fact, it wasn't Samsung or even Nokia who did it first, rather Sharp, in a phone that didn't really see light of day outside of Japan. This is the Sharp Mova SH241IS. Wonderful naming, isn't it? About a decade later, we had HTC with the Evo 3D and LG with the Optimus 3D bring the same concept over to smartphones. And by this point, we were off anaglyph glasses onto parallax screens. Basically, we didn't need special glasses to see the 3D effect. Over the years, we've had various brands, big ones like Samsung, small ones like Snail, niche ones like Red, all try and resurrect 3D on phones, and every single time, it's been hyped up to the moon. I mean, you guys remember the Amazon Fire phone, right? Or the red hydrogen one, remember all that hype surrounding them? And every one of them have failed. In fact, even outside of smartphones, 3D as consumer technology has failed. Honestly, barring the Nintendo 3DS, I can't really recall any other 3D device that was a roaring success. Now at number 9, we have Sapphire Glass or Sapphire Crystal. Now if you've watched Jerry Rig Everything videos, you'd have heard Zach say multiple times that glass, even Apple's ceramic shields, scratches at levels 5 or 6 on the Mohs hardness scale, while Sapphire scratches only at 8 or 9. So ever wondered why super expensive phones don't come with Sapphire covering the display instead? Well, they actually have in the past, and whenever Sapphire has been used, it's been heavily hyped. But as with every other thing on this list, this one failed too. Because the issue with Sapphire is that while it's hard and almost scratch proof, the bigger the slab of Sapphire gets, the more it's prone to shattering. So while brands have been able to successfully implement it on watches and as protective covers for camera lenses, it's not really been a feasible option for displays. While this failure might have been a result of technical limitations, the next one, number 8, it's just a pure gimmick. Eye tracking. Now, eye tracking might be fun in some cases. Tobii hardware for gaming, now that's been reasonably successful. It's even made its way onto some laptops. And more recently, we've seen Apple demonstrate eye tracking with their Vision Pro, which honestly looked pretty impressive. But all this needs specialized hardware and a use case scenario where eye tracking is actually needed. Now, trying to implement it with just a single low-resolution camera on a device that has absolutely need for it, now that's exactly what Samsung did almost a decade back. Smart Scroll. The selfie camera follows your eye. Look high, you scroll up. Look low, and you scroll down. While this was a cool feature to market, buyers eventually found out the implementation was really lacking. In fact, if I weren't to mince words, it absolutely sucked. Back then, Samsung went through a phase where they just load up their launches with weird gimmicks that were cool to show off at events, but wouldn't really end up being useful for the consumers. Thankfully, that's over now. Well, almost. But back then, there was another, and that's our number 7, HeartRate monitors on phones. Now don't get me wrong, heart rate sensors are extremely useful on things like fitness trackers and smartwatches. But back in the Galaxy S5 days, where it was a sensor on your phone that you needed to place your finger on and stay absolutely still for a while to get a reading, that was novelty. And after a couple of times of showing it off to friends and family, it's something we never ended up using. And here's a lesser known fun fact. A pulse monitoring app on any phone, including the one you're using right now, can use your phone's camera to get you pretty much the same results as that dedicated heart rate sensor Samsung used to provide. Now, talking about cameras and sensors, we get a number 6 on this list, that biometric scanner. Now, back in 2013, the popularity of Touch ID on the iPhone 5S was driving widespread adoption of fingerprint scanners on smartphones everywhere. Samsung was a little slow to react. It took them almost a year to add a fingerprint scanner to their flagships, and when they eventually did, it was one that needed a swipe, unlike Apple's Touch ID, which, as with most modern capacitive fingerprint scanners, required only a touch. So given they were late to the game as is, and with inferior hardware nonetheless, a couple of years later Samsung tried to get ahead of the curve, going for an iris scanner on the unfortunate Galaxy Note 7, may it rest in peace. A year later, Apple debuted Face ID on the iPhone X, and most Android manufacturers started adding 2D Face Unlock, which, while not as secure as Face ID or Samsung's iris scanner, did get the job done. It helped keep that annoying friend or sibling out of your phone while letting you unlock with ease. Now, Samsung kept the iris scanner around for a bit, but given Face ID or even 2D Unlock was much faster, and there also happened to be a race to bezel-less displays, in the end the iris scanner had to go the way of the dodo. Now, one of the things I miss the most about LG since they shut shop is the kind of competition they provided Samsung. LG always tried to match and even outdo Samsung feature for feature, no matter how absurd it was. So if Samsung scanned irises, LG hit right back with our number 5, Hand ID. Yeah, you read that right, Hand ID. LG with the G8 offered an option to scan the veins of your hand for biometrics. They managed to do that with a special time-of-flight sensor that they called a Z camera. It would bounce infrared waves off your hand, scan hemoglobin and your unique vein patterns. And yes, it was every bit as ridiculous as it sounds. So I'm sure you know what happened next and why it finds itself on this list. And that gets us to number 4, gesture controls. Now, this same Z camera allowed LG to market something called Air Motion. This let you do quite a few things like adjust volume levels and launch apps without touching the screen. Even Samsung had a similar take with their Air gestures, of course with worse hardware. Now, Google with the Pixel 4 had better hardware with a motion sensor from Project Soli. Now, I can see why this idea looks interesting. Say you're cooking, you want to look up a recipe, and you get to do that without touching the screen. I get it. But sadly, the implementation, it never really got there. Even now in 2023, Xiaomi on the Pad 6 Max, they seem to be trying to resurrect touchless control, but it's still as inaccurate as ever. Now, number 3, weird button placements, especially the power button. Initially, we used to see power buttons on the keypad or at the top of the phone, and it made sense. And as physical keys went out of style and phone sizes started growing, we started seeing power buttons being moved to the side. Again, sensible. But then in 2013, LG decided they were going to change that. With the LG G2, they moved the power and volume keys to the back. Now, I'd understand this if the power button had a fingerprint scanner built into it, and yes, eventually it did, but that was not until the LG G5. So back in 2013, it really didn't add much to the experience. Now, I didn't hate it or anything, I went in with an open mind, but to me, it felt very needless, very gimmicky, very quirky, very LG. At number 2, curved phones. And no, I'm not talking about the displays curving at the edges. They've been around for a while, and though brands like Samsung have been going with flat panels these days, curved displays are still very much a thing, very successful. What I am talking about here is phones that curve as a whole, whether it's the vertical curve of the LG G Flex or the way Samsung went about it with the Galaxy Round. It was unique back then. It was a head turner, a conversation starter. And these phones, as you can see, they were built around the fact that they were curved. That was the main selling point. There was so much hype surrounding it, but when people actually started to use these phones, we quickly found out, outside of some slight ergonomic gains, there really wasn't much useful there. So brands quickly went back to the standard candy bar form factors, and that's kinda remained the norm ever since. Well, at least outside of foldables. And now, number 1, blow to unlock. This is probably the funniest of them all. A few months before the launch of the iPhone 5S, back when Touch ID was just a rumor, Micromax decided to cash in with a blow to unlock. And yes, it is every bit as weird as it sounds, but it led to a lot of funny takes from people online. I mean, people had fun with it. It was basically just an app that triggered an unlock when the mic picked up air being blown into. It was kinda ridiculous to see Micromax hyping it up so much, almost building a launch surrounding it, and thankfully we don't have brands doing something that stupid anymore. So that's our list. Can you think of any other smartphone gimmicks that were overhyped and ended up failing? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching. Have a nice day.